welcome to another educational video about screen printing by Catspit Productions. Please remember that Catspit Productions is an authorized RANR dealer. We offer the complete line of RANR screen printing equipment and accessories, and we also offer screen printing supplies. So if you'd like to check out all the things we offer, please visit catspitscreenprintsupply.com, or you can visit the main website at catspitproductionsllc.com and follow the links from there to the web store. All of the proceeds from the catspitscreenprintsupply.com website go to support the continued production of free educational videos about screen printing on YouTube. So if you get a chance and you need some equipment and supplies, please give us a shot. Take a look at our offerings on the catspitscreenprintsupply.com website, and we'd be happy to have an opportunity to do business with you. Today's video is about a topic that I get asked all the time. This question has got to be one of the most common questions that I get asked about screen printing, and that is, how long do I expose my screens for? And the problem is that I can't definitively answer this question because there are several variables that go into the screen making process that I may not know these variables, or maybe there are certain variables that we can't determine, such as the UV output of your exposure unit. So today I'm going to give you some very general guidelines, and you got to remember that these are just numbers that I'm throwing out to give you kind of a general range, but they're not going to be specific exposure times. That's impossible for me to do, and you will need to do testing in order to determine where your proper exposure is at. Even though I'm going to throw out some numbers at you today, they're probably not going to be very accurate when you try to use them because of these variables and such. Okay, so let's talk about the variables that we have to consider when we're exposing screens. The first variable that you're going to have is your film positive. The quality of your film positive is going to really affect the exposure time. If your film positive is very poor and not very opaque, and it does not have high UV blocking properties, then you're probably going to need to underexpose. If your film positive is really, really good and of high quality, then your exposure time is going to be you're able to cure the emulsion more. You may be able to do a little bit more exposure and get the proper cure time with a good film positive. A weak film positive forces you to underexpose, which is not good. So you want to make sure your film positive is of very good quality. The other thing that's going to be a wicked variable is your emulsion, right? We don't know what kind of emulsion you're using. Is it a dual cure? Is it a photopolymer? Is it fresh? Is it old? Was the sensitizer mixed in properly? These things will affect your exposure time. So the emulsion, knowing what emulsion you have, is critical in determining your exposure time. So that's another variable that I wouldn't know unless you tell me when you ask, how long do I expose my screens for? Well, I have to know, is your film positive good? What kind of emulsion are you using? Another thing that can affect your screen making in your shop is the ambient temperature and humidity. If the temperature is too high, if it's too hot, and the humidity is too high, it's very possible that the emulsion will not expose and it won't work. So you got to watch out for extreme weather conditions. It could be even extremely cold or extremely hot, and high humidity in particular is something that you have to watch out for. You may touch the emulsion and it feels dry to the touch, but if the relative humidity in your area is like 90%, then the emulsion probably has about 90% humidity in it, and that too can affect your exposure time. Okay, so we have the variables of the photopolymer or the dual cure emulsion, right? So that's a variable in itself, but also your exposure source. Your light source is another variable. There are basically two main types of light sources we use. Let's look at the first one, right? This is an industrial fluorescent black lamp exposure unit, okay? So now, we have two different types of emulsions we can use with this exposure unit. So remember, these numbers that I'm throwing out at you are just generalizations. They're not specific. It's just a range, an idea of where you might be at. It's kind of gives you a comparison of a photopolymer to a dual cure, an industrial fluorescent lamp, black lamp exposure unit to a 500 watt work lamp. Okay, so remember, these numbers are not going to be like, oh, just dial it in and do it and that's it. Jonathan gave me the perfect exposure time. That's not how it's going to work. Okay, you're still going to have to test and figure out your exposure time. All right, so now with an industrial black lamp fluorescent exposure unit, let's say on a photopolymer, you might be 1 minute or less around that. I expose my screens for about 45 seconds on this unit with my particular photopolymer emulsion. Okay, with a dual cure emulsion, you might be 3 to 6 minutes. Okay, so there's a big difference there, you can see. Two different emulsions with the same exposure unit. But with a photopolymer on this exposure unit, you might be at a minute or less. With a dual cure, it could be up to 3 minutes or more. With a 500 watt work lamp, the situation is going to be a lot different. This is a basic 500 watt work lamp exposure unit. This is, a standard 500 watt work lamp that you can find at home improvement stores that's on a nice stand. Generally speaking, it's about 2 feet from the screen. Okay, so we have the film positive, we do this like this and whatnot. And on this unit, with a photopolymer, you're going to probably be, guesstimation would be 3 to 6 minutes. And then with a dual cure, it would be 6 minutes and up. Okay, so with the weaker UV output, your exposure times are going to be a lot longer. Okay, so again, it's very important to make sure that your film positives are of high quality if you want to have the easiest time doing your exposures. As you can see, there are a lot of variables to exposing the screen. So let's review really quickly. What are some of the variables that I pointed out here? First of all is your emulsion type. What kind of emulsion you're using? Are you using a fast photopolymer or are you using a slow dual cure? Okay. Secondly, what about your film positives? Are your film positives of high quality? Are they going to block the UV light properly to allow you to get a proper exposure? Okay. Thirdly, we talked about humidity, temperature, relative humidity and weather in your shop, extreme temperatures, extreme heat, extreme cold, or very, very high humidity could be problemsome and actually cause exposure issues. Okay, so you want to watch out for that. All right, finally, the exposure source itself, the light unit that you use to expose your screens, is going to be a variable in itself. And we talked about the two different exposure units, the industrial black lamp fluorescent exposure unit, right, and the 500 watt basic exposure unit. Now, with both of these units, there's also another variable to consider, and that's the age of the bulbs. How old are the bulbs? Especially with an industrial black lamp fluorescent unit, as the bulbs get older, your exposure times will increase. Okay, so that's probably going to be a very similar situation with a work lamp, but probably to a lesser extent. Okay, but do consider, again, another variable is the age of the bulbs in your exposure unit. Okay, so as you can see, the question, how long do I expose my screens for, is not very easily answered. Okay, there are so many variables that affect that there's no way to definitively answer that. Okay, but we can throw out a lot of information at you like we did in this video and give you some ranges and give you some comparison data that you can use to help dial in your exposure time. Okay, so that's it for today. It's starting to get hot in here again. I got to close down the shooting for today. It's all over. No more shooting today. And that's it. So thanks a lot for watching. Remember, if you like what you see, please rate, thumbs up, comment below. And if you like what you see, you got to subscribe. Please subscribe. All right, that's it. We'll see you next time.